Good evening, everyone, and thanks for tuning in to tonight's live stream from the New York City Metropolitan Republican Club. I'm John Sweeney, Club Treasurer, and if you haven't already, please visit metclubnyc.org and sign up for our newsletter to stay informed of future events, both in person and virtual. We also hope you'll consider becoming a member and supporting the club during this important election year in New York City. Tonight, I have the pleasure of speaking with Heather Reams, Executive Director of Citizens for Responsible Energy Solutions, or Crest. Crest is a right-of-center organization that engages policymakers and the public about responsible, conservative solutions to address our nation's energy, economic, and environmental security while increasing America's competitive edge. In April, Heather and Crest were instrumental in the framework and rollout of the new GOP-led climate plan, a collection of more than 30 bills to unleash environmental innovation, clean energy infrastructure, and natural conservation solutions. Heather, we've had other eco-right guests on our live stream in the past, including Bob Inglis of Republican and Quill Robinson of the American Conservation Coalition, and I know our audience is very eager to hear from you as well. So welcome to the program.
I'm thrilled to be here. Thanks so much, John.
So Heather, let's start with some quick background on you. Where are you from? How did you get involved in Republican politics? And what led you to your current position at Crest?
Yeah, I'm a lifelong Republican, born in Virginia Beach, Virginia. Lived there through my high school years, trekked out to the University of Washington in Seattle, Washington for my undergraduate degree. I call that the left coast. I mean, many do, but man, I saw it firsthand and realized I was really a Republican in a sea of Democrats for sure, and sacrificed many a grade because of my opinions. Climate change, clean energy weren't necessarily always on my radar, although I was a political science major. I think, what kind of changed it for me over time and being in Washington for over 25 years was becoming a mom, actually. I have two children, and just my daughter is 12, my son is 6. And, thinking about leaving this world better than you found it, what can I do? And kind of stumbled on clean energy. And that nexus with climate change wasn't quite there for me either. I'm from a Rush Limbaugh household, so climate change was taboo. So now I'm actually advocating for Republican solutions for climate change. So that path zigzags a little bit, but I'm pretty committed to this cause.
Yeah, well, conserving for future generations and kind of serving as a steward for the handoff is kind of a bedrock conservative principle. So I can see how you arrived there. Can you tell us a little bit more about the mission and activities of Crest? I think one thing that clearly differentiates Crest from other eco-right organizations is that you all will actually endorse individual candidates and help their campaigns, including New York's very own Elise Stefanik, who you endorsed early, and now, of course, she's a rising star in the party. So what is Crest's mission, and how are you going about accomplishing it?
Yeah, without reading off of I think the talking points or whatever you've got there, but we want to advance clean energy and climate solutions from a right-of-center approach. We hear a lot from the left, a lot of noise, a lot of big government mandates, a lot of spending, and those are easy to do. It's easy to increase government and spend. It's hard to really think about solving problems, getting solutions, and that's what we're after is coming up with ideas, conservative ideas that limit government, allow for liberty, allow for freedom, but also can spur economic growth and give us a cleaner environment. And we believe that conservative principles can do that. So that's what Crest does. We have multiple pieces. We were founded about 9 years ago. I've been with the organization for 5 as its executive director. We started off as an organization, and the theory was, if we started endorsing candidates, if we started helping politically and working on the politics rather than the policy, could that change the dynamic for Republicans? And what we found over a period of time is yes, it could. If we're starting to endorse candidates and in particular reward candidates, not just at election time, but members when they're in the House or Senate, that they actually take a good vote when it comes to protecting the environment. On the right, it's crickets, and on the left, they're still getting hammered. So there were members are stuck. Well, what's the point of taking a good vote, to expand clean energy, for instance, through a tax credit, if I'm not going, no one's going to give me the snaps, the kudos, the money, the anything to do it. So we tried to, like, how do we unwind that, roll back, and then say, what if we start endorsing, we start saying, good job, will behavior change? By the way, it does. If anybody's got kids, they know you give them positive feedback, you're going to get more of that. So that's how it started. But it was less on the policy. And quite frankly, up until recently, we've been fairly policy agnostic, but very much wanting to meet members of Congress where they are. And some are ready to jump into the deep end of the pool. And some just need to be convinced that the water is okay to even put their toe in. And that's okay. But creating an atmosphere for members to be able to reach out to us and say, what can I do? I'm interested in conservation. I'm interested in forests. I really love nuclear energy. What can I do? Republicans didn't really have that before. Now they do.
You said something that struck me, talking about the politics versus the policy, because I do think that people get hung up a lot on the policy, and that doesn't really captivate voters' imaginations. But you and Crest, I think, have been more at the forefront of helping with the messaging of clean energy and how Republicans can talk about it. And I think that, it makes sense. You've got a pretty extensive background in communications and public affairs. What are some of the messaging strategies that you've spoken with Republican lawmakers about that seem to work?
First of all, local. This, energy is like any policy, but it's not all one size fits all. Most of us as Republicans don't like that anyway. We like a federalist system. We like what's going on in our own backyards. And we want our members of Congress to represent us in our own backyards. So if I live in Virginia, which I do, I care that my member is thinking about Virginia and it's not thinking about Nevada, right? But they also serve on committees, and they also have jurisdictions they look at. So they have to work across multiple ideas. So we get that, but that localized idea, that nexus of good policy and localization is really, really important. The second thing I suggest that members do is really go out into the field, even in their own districts or beyond, and go do site visits, go see the technology, go meet the workers. It's easy to legislate. Well, it's not easy to legislate, but you're here in Washington and it just feels so fake, not real. And you go in and you see something so tangible and so real, and you realize you're affecting jobs by the policies that you're advocating for. And to think twice about that, or go see that the beach erosion, or that the ski resort usually has a snowpack of 6 feet. In February, it only has 2. And that's been that way for 5 years. What's happening and why? And asking those questions. And I think when people, but particularly members, can speak from specific instances that are personal, they will do a lot better. They're also a lot more authentic. They're a heck of a lot more convincing. And then I think it helps their staff as well, really help their boss do their job.
Yeah, I'm hearing that more and more, where people are seeing the effects of climate change locally, and whether or not they believe that it's man-made or know where it's coming from, they can tell that there's at least something amiss, and so they're becoming a little bit more open to discussing solutions. So you often cite both economic and national security reasons for why investments in clean energy are important for America's future. Can you dive into that a bit and explain what exactly is at stake and what role Republicans should be playing in the clean energy debate?
Yeah, I just testified recently at the House Select Committee on the Climate Crisis that was created last Congress and is now in this Congress here in the 117th. And an area of significant concern for all, I think most Republicans now, particularly on the House side, but you're seeing it, is this issue of China. Just China as a competitor, China with the supply chains, China stealing our IP. And the idea that we're supposed to, if you're listening to the left, cut back our choices of energy. So we're keeping in the ground. We're not looking at all the above, but but we've got to also cut prices and not our choices, though. And it seems like, and that's also, if we're cutting our choices, we're also making ourselves subordinate to China that is using all the above in any way they can. So, reducing our emissions. The U.S. has the lowest emissions of any developed nation, any developed nation. China, it continues to pollute and is now polluting more than all the industrialized nations combined, first world nations combined, right?
So include in that industrialized nations.
The OECD, which is the Organization of Industrialized Nations. So these
North
are
America, Western Europe, Japan, South Korea, Australia. China's emitting more than all of those
combined.
Wow, that's astounding.
And that was actually that just came out. A report from the Rhodium Group just came out actually just a few weeks ago and talked about, now China has officially eclipsed the developing world. They say they're not a developed nation. I contend they are, but even so, pulling them out, they're polluting more than all the others. And that's, I think, a real problem when you're talking about they're polluting. We're reducing our emissions, and particularly through technology, through natural gas, through all of the above, and we're letting them pollute. So, I mean, you think about a strong China versus a strong United States, and the geopolitics really matters. And we can solve a lot of these problems through American innovation and exporting those technologies. And that's what we should be thinking about, not exporting jobs to China. Another piece, and in the supply chains, critical minerals that are needed to develop a lot of the high-tech pieces that we use for energy generation, but also probably for this broadcast. We need those, and we're not sourcing them here in the United States. So we have some real gaps in our ability to really function outside of China. But if you look geopolitically, just what's going on in Taiwan, in the South China Sea, you read some of the leadership in the Philippines and talking about their concerns about China. The world, at least they're close to China, does not want a strong China. They want a strong United States. I mean, I think we're the good guys, but we're the good guys for a lot of reasons. But when it comes to energy and it comes to pollution, we're creating the technologies, and we're also exporting them, and we're not polluting nearly as much as they are. So we've just got some vast issues that need to be addressed in our policy making, looking at this not just from a domestic issue. It's really a global issue. It's global climate change.
Yeah, it seems like you've got this whole nationalist wing of the Republican Party that's sort of ascendant these days, and they're always looking for ways that they can stick it to China. And this whole climate angle seems to be this massive baseball bat that's just laying on the ground and no one's using it. Why isn't there more of this nationalist argument for supporting clean energy and competing with China?
I'm not sure. This is a question I've been trying to tease out in some way from Democrats. I feel like the House and Senate Republicans, or the House Republicans and Democrats overall, really are like goldfish looking at one another. They're just not blinking when it comes to this issue. I'm like, you just acknowledge China is a problem. Is it the only problem? No. But is it a global problem? Yes. What do we need to do to strengthen America, to strengthen our exports, to strengthen our agriculture exports? I mean, basically everything we do in terms of producing products, energy production, transportation, energy creation, agriculture is all lower emissions than most countries. I mean, if the world basically, this is kind of, it's not going to happen, but if the world adopted, just said, we're going to only buy US energy only, the world would be a lot cleaner. I mean, that's just the facts, because we operate in such a clean environment already. And so to say that the US has all this work to do because we've been polluting for some time, we're meeting that. We're doing it. We're doing it without mandates. So it's, what is the rest of the world doing? How are they catching up? And I think it's a real stick in the eye when you hear Democrats say the US has so much to do, and in the meantime allowing China to continue to pollute for another 10 years with coal-fired power plants. It just doesn't make sense. And I think those are fair arguments that we haven't heard enough pushback, except for the fact that the US has been polluting more for a longer period of time.
And those coal-fired power plants from China are some of the dirtiest burning coal plants in the world, from what I understand. And they're exporting that technology to all these developing countries in Africa and South America. Should we what can we do to encourage China to burn less coal? And is there a policy that we should be pursuing? And I guess the flip side of that, where it gets complicated, is how do you do that without necessarily, hurting our domestic coal industry, which is already, suffering a lot these days?
Well, I mean, if you're exporting U.S. coal, if we're not using it in the United States, but we're using it in Africa or Asia or Southeast Asia, if we're exporting coal, that's a good thing, right? Because it's cleaner to begin with. So if we're burning U.S. coal abroad, it's not the cleanest, but it is cleaner than the Chinese coal. And it also, you think about a lot of these developing nations, this is a poverty issue. The difference between having the lights turned on or not, you're not really going to care where your electricity comes from, right? You're going to want electricity, period. Hey, it's great if it's clean, but I have it. And that just really reduces poverty, education, healthcare, outcomes for children, all kinds of things are just all boats rise when you're talking about bringing energy. And 300 million people don't have electricity in this world. That's a problem. Any electricity on a regular basis. And it's mostly in developing nations, all probably in developing nations. So they want it. So you have to recognize that. So how do they use less coal? They have a cheaper way of doing it. And there's no cheaper way right now. The closest we have is natural gas. That is why innovation is so important to solving emissions issues. We have to create it, develop it, scale it, and export it.
So that's an excellent segue into our next topic that I wanted to discuss, which is how the jobs angle and why a clean energy revolution would be good for the U.S. economy. Obviously, there's some caveats with clean energy that I think Republican voters worry about, such as what more clean energy means for fossil fuel jobs in the U.S. We've had this fracking boom. It's been great for the economies of several states, many of them battlegrounds like Pennsylvania and Ohio. And I think the fossil fuel industry now employs around 1 million Americans. So what is the case for clean energy in terms of American jobs? And is there a way to smooth the transition to ensure that all of these people in the fossil fuel industry don't get left behind? Sorry, I just gave you a lot, but
no, there's a couple of things to unpack there. I appreciate that. I appreciate the question. We're just finishing up, Biden's 100 days. And we've had a Keystone Pipeline go to, not funding that, closing that down. We just had the Colonial Pipeline in the southeast part of the United States not be able to bring gas forward because of a threat and a cyber threat that basically shut down ability to have gas and around the Washington, D.C. area for 3 days. So people noticed, right? I mean, pipelines are infrastructure as much as anything else. But I think more importantly, when we were producing all the above, the United States, every kind of resource that we had, we were using in some way, albeit some of it shutting down. We were energy independent. And what that meant was we weren't reliant on other countries, particularly hostile nations or OPEC or others, to tell us when we can get our energy. We weren't beholden. We were an energy exporter, which has a tremendous amount of power for us. So there should be all kinds of energy should be on the table. Second is geographically. I mentioned I lived in Washington State, went to the University of Washington. There's a lot of hydro out there. Why? Because it's coming from the mountains and they've got dams and they're able to maximize that and bring costs down. But, in a place that has less hydro, they're going to have maybe the sun's shining a lot more than it is in Washington State. So geography matters and where you can produce energy. And of course, the investments where you have nuclear energy, for instance, it's a lot of red tape to go through, like 20 years, plus the cost to maintain that. But those power plants are there and can produce low carbon to no carbon energy. So the point is we can create jobs wherever they are. It's just not putting a square peg in a round hole. The sun's not blowing, the wind's not shining. Is the water flowing in some way, or is the ground hot enough underneath to give geothermal, or whatever else is next? It's hydrogen, renewable natural gas, biofuels. All of it just means there's jobs everywhere. But specifically to just lowering emissions overall, when you look at renewable energy, it's in every state in the country. I think it's in almost every congressional district in the country. And you think about this being a big nation, it's a lot of a lot of big open land out there. And you think about land ownership and you think about growing what? You can grow wheat, you can grow soybeans, you can grow energy. And I think, for a lot of people, it really, especially as family farms tend to slow down with the next generation, the jobs aren't there for them, the kind of high-tech jobs they want for the next generation. Solar energy and wind energy in particular provide not only a heck of a great way to make some money, but also the high-tech nature to attract people to want to stay on the farm, own the land. Also just put this as a flag. My husband's a veteran in the Air Force, but clean energy like wind and solar also attract veterans. About 10% of the workforce is from veterans who have served their country and they just want to go back to rural America. They don't want to live in New York City or Washington, D.C. But if there's no jobs for them, they can't stay there. And these are veterans who have served their country, who deserve to go home and have a good life back at home. So there's just a lot of great things that are happening with all the above energy. That's why we embrace all of them. There isn't any one that we are preferring one or the other. And we're hoping that members of Congress can see this benefit and all boats can rise. So if you're a sunshine state, you're a wind state, you're a nuclear state, you can work together to find some common sense legislation that's going to boost the economy, but still lower emissions.
And just to contextualize it, I mean, you mentioned that veterans are coming home and they're finding jobs in wind and solar. What kind of jobs are we talking about in wind and solar? Are these manufacturing, construction, or what is it?
All kinds. Well, certainly there are the more labor intensive jobs in terms of like putting solar panels on roofs or creating solar farms. And then the maintenance of those. Those jobs can tend to move around a little bit as well. So people who do want to get out a little bit more, but just don't want to stay in one place, there's jobs for them, but there's some maintenance as well. Wind energy, the production, the manufacturing, of course, is there, but also the maintenance of it as well. And don't forget utility scale when you're thinking about, we're not thinking about a couple wind turbines. We're thinking utility scale massive. There's massive land management issues, zoning issues, communications, community relations issues. There's just so many pieces to this that really give something for everybody. I think the overlooked pieces, people think about just the hard labor jobs, but I can't tell you the number of people that I work with also that are in community relations that are, highlighting the fact that the tax base they're bringing to a rural community because they're generating energy. They may not be blessed to have the natural gas or oil, but they also are blessed to have wind, and they're an energy exporter as a state. Flush with cash in their school systems because they've got a tax base that's bringing them money. So they have community relations and making sure that they are bringing the good news forward and making sure people recognize the value of the energy in their own backyard.
So it sounds like it spans the gamut between, like you said, the kind of physical labor-intensive jobs up to upper echelons of management. And okay. So
yeah, it's pretty much everything, but people kind of think it's one kind of laboring job and it's labor and it's not for everybody. And that's not the case. It has something, just like any manufacturing and company would have the managers all the way down. So room for growth, improvement, making more money, maybe getting into a company, getting picked up, moved around, maybe to someplace else. But great paying jobs. Are they on par? There's been talk about, are they on par with like the coal or oil industry? And there's varying on the laboring part of it, or the labor, hourly wage. It's close. It's not apples to apples in being able to say for sure, but the more this energy is used, I think the price is going to go up. But the competitive wages, when you're thinking about, particularly the heartland, when just finding jobs can be really hard. All of a sudden, you've got opportunities you never had before.
You touched on this in your response earlier about nuclear and how nuclear, it just has so much red tape, and it takes 20 years to get a plant up and running from the time it's conceived to actually open. I don't know if you listen to the podcast, How to Save a Planet, but they did a whole episode about this and how nuclear is kind of this no-brainer. It's a cheap, well, it's not cheap, but it's an available source of energy that is carbon neutral. We have the technology now, but it's simply not a good solution, they said, because it takes so long to build them and it's so expensive to build them. Is there a way for Republicans to impact that? Like, is there a way to use the policy levers to help us get out of our own way and build more nuclear faster?
Yeah, the technology has improved tremendously with nuclear too. Small modular nuclear reactors is the term. And there's a lot of demonstration projects for this that they literally can sit, the campus is the size of a football field, rather than acres and acres and acres. So, I mean, smaller amounts of waste, also creating not neutral, but zero carbon once it's producing energy. So it's pretty remarkable. Some of the challenges in nuclear and keep maintaining our costs. And size, and the waste issue. There's a number of pieces, and generally the American public, when they hear nuclear, they're afraid. They think of Chernobyl. They think of 3 Mile Island. If you're old enough to know that about that, they don't recognize how safe nuclear is. There's a tremendous issue with waste. What to do with waste? Where to put it? If it's in Nevada or it's in different places, where to store it and how to store it. But if we're thinking about solving the emissions problem, not just in the United States, but in the world, it is baffling to think that nuclear is not part of this solution. So Congress, particularly Republicans, are not only increasing the research and development for nuclear, and that's small modular nuclear versus those big cooling towers you see if you live near one, but also looking at the reform, the NEPA reform, the streamlining the permitting that is needed. So you're not, think about something that takes 20 years to build. That's an awful lot of red tape. That's an awful lot of money. That's a lot of lawyers. That's a lot of people working and probably chasing their tail for a long time, versus a 2-year process, which would cut the cost tremendously. And we could start getting that zero emissions fuel out there faster. So the time is now to continue with those investments. And that's why all the above is so important. I think that the other piece to note is like countries like France, which is like ground zero for Paris, right? The Paris Agreement, they use nuclear, and they've been unabashedly using nuclear. Japan's emissions have increased tremendously over the last 10 years because they have not been using nuclear. They're now about to start to use nuclear again. So the other countries use nuclear and use it as part of their low carbon solutions, and the United States should be no different.
Great. So you talk about investments in nuclear and other clean energy, which I think is a good intro to these 30 plus bills that the GOP has introduced in Congress, focused on clean energy infrastructure and environmental protection. So what are the key components of these bills that the GOP is backing, and how do they differ from, the Green New Deal?
Well, I mean, on a global issue, Green New Deal is of command and control, right? It's about the government controlling and spending, and it also isn't just about energy or climate. It's about environmental justice, social justice, and you're seeing some of that with the infrastructure, the domestic infrastructure we're talking about. I thought infrastructure was roads and bridges, and I thought energy was part of that too. Broadband, sure, anything that's going to make our economy hum. I had no idea childcare was part of roads and bridges and infrastructure. And we've got this debate in Washington now, and it makes you wonder if the sky is really blue, or when you're having to just debate basic facts about what infrastructure is. That being said, it's the Green New Deal also is it's such pie in the sky, and it would take people losing their minds literally to be able to pass something so crazy. But the Republicans, on the other hand, have been they've been struggling with what they're for a period of time, and you're really seeing that turn around. They're for markets, and Republicans are for markets. They're for lowering emissions, sure, but they weren't articulating or even getting credit for a lot of the things they were doing. Dominant in conservation and land management, forest management. Reducing wildfire likelihood. A lot of this all goes to emissions in the air. So we've got, as a party, a really good track record we haven't been talking about. Now, emissions are getting higher, and there's more technology to have reduce emissions. And I think a lot of the bills that you see in that 30, and that's really just a sampling of what we're going to continue to see, John. That is just the beginning. It's
really?
not the end. Yeah. These are bills and ideas that actually I would say are more of an interest of the member, whether it's forestry or nuclear or strategic minerals, mining ability. They're across the board in what they are, but they're really what the member is most familiar with. And more members are working with others and recognizing I need to help out. Energy storage, for instance, is wind doesn't blow, sun doesn't shine. But how do you store that energy? We don't have batteries and the technology to store that energy for a long time. But energy storage can also help natural gas, for instance. So it's more of a tech neutral piece. And those types of legislation are what's really, I guess, spurring interest of how do we help all boats rise, all the above. So Republicans are saying all the above. Democrats are saying keep it in the ground. That's generally like what we're seeing. And that is a really nice wedge issue for Republicans to say, we're not going to shut you down. We're going to think about how we're doing natural gas, and we're going to think about capturing the carbon, monetizing it, and using it for enhanced oil recovery. Well, that's great. Or actually putting the fizz in your drink is another way to do it. That's what we do. We figure out how to use all these components and make money off of them, right? So they're actually marketable. And the technology is allowing us to do that. I just feel like we have such a good story to tell as Republicans. And they're market driven, they're technology driven, they're exciting. The innovation is really exciting. Democrats, on the other hand, their bills are more of the same. We spend trillions of dollars to get outcomes that aren't defined. And I think what's nice about what we see from Republicans, these 30 bills, shows that we are not only at the table, we have to be listened to now. Our Republicans are heads in the sand. I once had a staff member tell me, you Republicans, if you guys just recognize that climate change was real, you would understand why the Green New Deal is so important to solving our issues, because it's so urgent. And I'm like, well, look, I'm a Republican and I believe that climate change is real. And there's no way in hell I'm ever going to say, bring in big government and start spending and having government mandates because I want to solve climate change. No Republican's going to say that. You're going to start to see a competition of ideas. And that's what you're seeing. Those 30 bills are a down payment of the competition of ideas that we can do next. We just passed an amazing energy bill in 2020. It was kind of done right at the holidays. So, and I think with COVID, people are tired, weren't really paying attention, but we got a boon for investment in research and development for all kinds of energy. These were bipartisan bills. So it can be done in a fiscally responsible, market-oriented way. That's a great model. Let's build on that.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think anybody, at least in our membership, and most of the Republican Party is going to back the Green New Deal and this whole government takeover of the economy that it seems to contemplate. But I think it seems like there is some role that government needs to be playing here in terms of driving the investment, similar to how government sort of led the way on the space race, and now the private sector has sort of taken over that. How much should government be doing here to sort of put their thumb on the scale versus leaving it to markets and market forces?
Yeah, a couple things here. The government giving clear signals that they're interested in investment in this area. We get more investment. So that is, and there's numerous examples of that where you've got, for every $1 the government spends, private sector is spending $22. That's not in every investment, but there are a lot of instances, particularly in this space, in the clean energy space, where that is the case. I mean, that's phenomenal. So it's clear market signals. But the second is that as a country, we're prioritizing that. We want to see more of that. So that also creates these market mechanisms of like, oh, well, we're investing. So the government also needs to be reducing regulations too, and getting out of the way and letting industry do what industry does best. Corporations are not big, bad polluters who don't care about the environment. They're run by people like you and me who care a lot about this country. And, are trying to balance the economic, energy, and environmental needs of our country. And there is a common sense balance there, that tripod, that unfortunately the left doesn't tend to see. So I think that the regulation part is another area. And then I think prioritizing certain kinds of tech neutral technologies. I mentioned energy storage as an example. There are also areas where there are tax credits that are more tech neutral. We don't know what the next technology is going to be that's really going to be ground changing like fracking was. But fracking came to be because of U.S. investment, U.S. regulation, U.S. Investment in R&D, exploration, along with the private sector. So what will be next? The next form of clean energy, it really could be anything or any kind of technology. So how do we incent the market? How do we incent innovators to do what they do best? And I think finally, protect our IP. China and the Asian nations have been stealing our IP for a long time. Intellectual property. There was one study in it, and it was only one study I could find on this, but it was the idea of being an innovator and creating an innovation and knowing it's not going to be protected or you can't make money off of it. It has a chilling effect on innovators. And you think about that not just from someone in their garage, but think about a corporation that's putting in millions, if not billions of dollars into a product or an idea that will later be replicated, stolen, and replicated in China at a cheaper cost. There's a role that the U.S. can do to protect the IP, particularly through trade agreements.
I think there's this perception of China as just this industrial powerhouse that doesn't innovate and just steals technology from other countries or borrows it or whatever. But are they trying to innovate in the clean tech space, like in the clean energy space? Are they coming up with new ways that they could then export?
Not super expert on China, what they are doing in a more positive way. I guess I should look at the other side of the coin on some of that.
I'm just wondering if this is an area where they're already charging ahead and trying to compete with us, directly.
Certainly in volume. First of all, they got a heck of a lot more people than we have in the United States. So they are producing more electric vehicles, more solar panels, more wind turbines. Everything is more there. So when you do it a per capita standpoint, maybe it's not so impressive. But if you look at pure numbers, it is impressive. So yeah, they've also, because of some of our foreign policies, though, with the previous administration, not 2 administrations ago, the Obama administration basically incented that China with the minerals and how we were creating solar panels, to let China basically take it over. And the trade issues have become really quite palpable, and the industry really relies on China right now. And you layer onto that a lot of the minerals that they're using to create solar panels are there's a huge human rights issues. You've got some real problems. So we've got to think about supply chains when we're incenting, right? We create an incentive in a market to have more solar. Well, they're going to go to the cheapest place it can be created to have it. To build and to create in some way. I mean, not that it gets to the IP issue, but I think what they are doing is, I think they are trying to innovate. I do think they're trying to do things, but they're also trying to be a world dominant power. I wouldn't necessarily put them in they're doing good category. And in my opinion, this isn't Crest's opinion, it's my opinion, China has been playing a really good long game. And people come and go out of politics, and they're in here for 5 years or they're in here for 50 years. But China's been doing it a lot longer. And recognizing historically where China has been is really needs to be done. And you graduate from school and you get to a fancy job at the White House, and you think you've got all the answers to solve the world, and it's not China, it's something else. But China's not a good actor. China hides their numbers from what they're. You see pictures of people wearing masks, not because of COVID, because of the pollution. The children have higher rates of asthma. This is not because they're trying to lower their emissions. It's because they're trying to be an industrial powerhouse. So imagine that was happening in the U.S. I
imagine there are more people in Beijing who died last year of pollution than of COVID.
Okay. Yes.
I don't have that statistic, but I would challenge anyone to show me that statistic and prove me right or wrong.
Got some smart people listening. I bet there's somebody who's got that stat somewhere.
Just a couple more questions, and then we'll switch to questions from the audience. So if you're out there and you have questions for Heather, please submit them in the comments. So House Republican leader Kevin McCarthy and our new House Conference Chair, Elise Stefanik, have both voiced support for a clean energy agenda. You've supported Stefanik. But as I'm sure you're all too aware, Republicans for the last several decades have been just suspicious of environmental causes. They equate it with the left and Democrats. But does the elevation of these two individuals in the party signal a shift both among elected Republicans and voters at large in terms of their thinking and attitude towards this issue?
I think that's the most exciting part of the work that I do. It was a lonely place 5 years ago, John, and
It's still a pretty lonely place, Heather. It's still pretty lonely.
Well, let me tell you, I would consider someone almost a champion if they called me back or remembered my name if they saw me a second time. You know, I was like, oh, they're a champion. They remember me. That's not the case anymore. Honestly, the phone's ringing off the hook, but we've got a lot of thought. We're having a lot of thoughtful conversations about solutions, really common sense solutions that will help Americans and help American business, help American workers. And I think it's high time that we have that. And but with a principled right of center approach. And I'll say this: the Democrats have been trying to solve this issue for decades, and they haven't even gotten close. And every time they get close, they shoot for so much. We see that happening right now. They have the trifecta with the House and the Senate and the presidency, and they're just going for it all, and they'll lose time and again. I mean, the most durable legislation is going to be bipartisan legislation in some way, but something that's going to be pro-economic for our businesses, for our workers, is it's really going to make the difference. And you see the talking points coming from the left, talking about union jobs. You're seeing it from the right. And that marrying of jobs and climate policy is really important. And I think Republicans are starting to see that that there is a political plus to being involved, and it could be almost a political negative not to have a position on climate. The gateway to this, I'll call it the gateway drug. I think it's not the safest way to call that, but clean energy and looking at the jobs all across the country. Who's against jobs, right? So if you're talking about different kinds of jobs, you're looking for all the above and you like competition, what's not to like about clean energy? And particularly when it helps, rural America, veterans, jobs for different kinds of skill sets. I mean, this conservation. These are our talking points, our natural talking points. So the messenger has been off to members of Congress on the right. The message has also been off. So what Crest sought to do, and a number of organizations who have been on this program with you, are saying we're right of center. We're Republicans, and we think that climate change is happening, and we think clean energy is good, and you should too. And if you look at the demographics of the younger people, this climate change is a very big issue for them. But you also see some of the Republicans losing clout, losing ground in 2018, for instance, in the elections. 2020 balanced a little bit more, but 2018 was a pretty tough year for Republicans. Where did Republicans lose? They lost suburban women. I'm one of them. They didn't lose me, but people like me. They lost young people. They lost independence. And this issue of climate change really fits in some way. And a lot of people think especially young people, will think they're Democrats because they believe that climate is changing. That's a problem. That's a problem for our party. So when you have members who are politically astute, like a Kevin McCarthy, who really spends a lot of time getting a majority, and you have members like Elise Stefanik, now a power player. She was always a rising star, but man, is she a star. But she has always been there on the issue. We got to do something about it. It wasn't just the politics; it was just the right thing to do. She understood that from the get-go. But she was trying to change the thinking and open other members' eyes to this is an issue of a generation. We have to do something about it. We have to be at the table. We have to bring smart ideas, conservative ideas forward, and compete, and not just take it from the left and not be the party of no. So I think this all what's going on right now I think it's super dynamic. I think it's exciting. It's got the global part to it. It's got the domestic part to it. It's got the politics to it. I mean, I love my job, but I really feel like in this time right now, we're at a time where we can really make a difference. And I think more Republicans telling their elected officials, look, you can believe the climate is changing. It doesn't mean you want the Green New Deal. It means you want a clean environment. It means you want all the above. You want competition. You want to take care of our world. There's a lot to like about that.
Wow. Well, that's very well said. And that's a great place to end our Q&A, Heather, and switch to Q&A from the audience, if you still have some time.
Oh, you bet. I'm happy to be with you, and I appreciate you having me.
Okay, great. So the first one that I want to ask is actually one a question I had whenever you said it, and I didn't want to interrupt you, but what is renewable natural gas?
Yeah, it's natural gas that's been used before. You can actually capture it. Yeah.
Really?
Yeah. I mean, this is what's the amazing thing about technology. Now, that's not cheap, but you can capture it, the emissions from it. Same with methane too. There's a lot of these offshoots that you can collect and monetize and use and commercialize in some way. So
is that mostly through industrial use, or is that in households?
Well, it's also it's a lot of agriculture.
Okay.
It's a lot of agriculture and grabbing those emissions from animals too, and using that as a fuel.
I don't want to even ask what the methods are behind that, but
well, you like your hamburgers.
Yeah. All right. So you mentioned here's another good one. You mentioned Keystone XL. How should Republicans be thinking about Keystone XL? It seems like an oddly specific issue to be consuming so much political airtime. Is it worth this much energy and attention from the conservative movement, or is it a distraction being pushed by special interests?
It's a distraction from special interests. I think it's the fight is the proxy fight, really, from the keep it in the ground, is really what it is. It represents so many other possible pipelines. Pipelines are an incredibly efficient way to move any kind of energy source. The gasoline I mentioned in the colonial pipelines here in the southeast part of the country you can move gasoline or natural gas or oil through trucking, trains, pipelines. By the way, pipelines are the least you're going to have from emissions. So it's just like there's also just this logic piece that I think really angers Republicans. Like, it's the lowest form of emissions of moving any kind of fuel. Why wouldn't you want this? But I think it's really more of a proxy fight. And it's an example of the lack of support that Democrats generally have about any kinds of fossil fuels, to the point, but that's good rhetoric, right? It's good. That's good to bring on the campaign trail, or talk at home, or say you're not going to be able to eat your hamburger anymore because people shouldn't be eating beef. It's more of a rhetoric, but really more of a proxy fight. And I'll just flag that excellent. The Keystone Pipeline, it comes from Canada, that has pretty strict environmental regulations as well, and are some would say, and on the left would say, have amazing laws to try to reduce emissions, but they sure want to continue to produce oil and gas. So the logic there just doesn't follow. And I think this is a conservative that drives me nuts when the logic doesn't follow.
Yeah. So next question would be, Republicans are negotiating with the Biden administration about this infrastructure bill. And we're going to be seeing a counter proposal soon. I didn't see if they released one today, but is there going to be what do you think Republicans are going to counter in terms of the clean energy component of the infrastructure bill?
EVs are in. That's one part. Electric vehicles are in. I heard that from Senator Capito herself over the weekend, and that's also, it was in a bill that she had proposed last Congress too, and having EVs, not the EVs in the sense of the tax credit for them, but more of the infrastructure for them, which many would say would be an appropriate role for government in building that infrastructure. That we know isn't. We also have heard that resiliency is part of it. Makes some sense too, and cybersecurity is part of that. What we haven't heard, and this is I'm sure not surprising to you, John, or your audience, is the left really wants climate change in there in a big way, Green New Deal style way. And the Republicans aren't giving an inch on that. So that, I think, is with clean energy is in there. Climate change pieces
So
are in there.
nothing for wind and solar, or
Not yet. Not yet. And I mean, that's really the politics of what's too bad. And but they're continuing to negotiate, and the bipartisanship is great. Our fear is it goes to reconciliation on this piece, and we're just going to be handed a bad deal overall. I think I think we're too far apart right now. I think we can get there if we're actually negotiating, but Democrats are more and more saying close down the negotiations because it's weakening the Democrat stance. If it were reversed, I'd probably say the same thing. We shouldn't do that. But right now, it's not clear beyond what I've just stated what is actually in.
Is Manchin going to go along with all these clean energy initiatives? I mean, he's the wild card in my opinion. I feel like they're going to have to buy him off or something.
Good dinner at the Capitol Grill. Well, I mean, Manchin. I always say this, whether he's got a D or R next to his name, and it is a D. He is from West Virginia. It's a coal state, it's a natural gas state. And anyone who represents a state like that, regardless of their party, has to represent the constituency. And I know people get frustrated, Democrats get frustrated with him, but what do you expect? So he's not going to agree with anything that's not a good deal for West Virginia.
Yep. He is someone who needs to be appeased for sure. So you engage a lot of Republican lawmakers, obviously. Do you spend time with the ones who maintain that climate change is a hoax, or do you not bother with them?
Well, usually when you're with Republicans, you're going to have a mix. You're going to have a mix of just about everybody. So no, being around an echo chamber is never fun. I one anecdotal question, piece I had where Crest is a member of the Republican Governors Association, and I introduced ourselves to governors, and most governors aren't as familiar with us because we do most of our work on the federal level. But we want two reasons. We want to engage governors and make sure the state and federal policies that we're advocating kind of work together. And second is governors are also a pipeline for senators, members of Congress, cabinet members. So it's good to get to know them. I was speaking to, at the time, Governor Scott Walker, and I was talking about this, what we do. And he was like, no, clean energy. No, it's in Wisconsin. No. I said, okay. How much time do you spend flying around, raising money for Republican governors? He's like, half my time. All right. So what happens if you could solve that problem and get to 50+1 with independence, women, and young people more quickly, and not have to spend as much money? He's like, you got me. So there's always a way to get them. It may not be the easiest.
Political hook comes back to the
hook. I know how much time he spends raising money, but I'd say otherwise he's not there, and that's okay. There are a number of members, particularly who are admittedly say that are older, they're just not going to change their mind, and it is what it is.
Who are your champions in the Republican governors right now?
In the governors?
Yeah.
We've seen a lot of, I think Governor Abbott's done an amazing job in Texas, all the above. Really impressive. The Utah governor, we have a new Utah governor who has really embraced all the above. Utah's a red state, but they really get the climate change piece of it. Governor McMaster in South Carolina, an older guy too. But he's and really has embraced all the above and recognizes the value of conservation and environmental protection, especially because of the tourism industry. Governor Brad Little from Idaho, said early on in his tenure when he became governor, yeah, the climate's changing. I'm a farmer. I see it. It's changing. We should do something to make sure we're not polluting the air and we're taking care of the environment. He said something like, why is this political? It's common sense.
What about DeSantis?
DeSantis is another one who's really, I try to give some love to some other governors there, but DeSantis gets all the love on that, but he's doing a terrific job and recognizing.
He's getting a lot of love, period. I'm just curious.
He's getting a lot of love.
He seems to be having a moment right now with the Republican electorate.
He's doing, I think overall his voters are very pleased with him, but he's doing a lot in the environmental section and he's not getting dinged for it. If you want to read the politics, take a look at DeSantis. It's not a political loser for Republicans. It's a winner.
Great. you mentioned the Colonial Pipeline. Is there an argument here that clean energy sources would be more or less prone to interruption and or sabotage by foreign powers?
I mean, yeah,
I think where this question is coming from is there was a lot of scorn poured on clean energy during the freeze in Texas, and how the turbines don't turn, and so we don't have any energy or electricity. But there are also clearly vulnerabilities with pipelines. So how would you respond to that angle?
Well, I'll repeat that one piece that, there's vulnerabilities for almost every kind of energy production. And if you're not protecting it in some way, particularly from a cyber attack, it's just asking for it. So that's one. Specifically about the wind turbines in Texas, unfortunate characterization, because it wasn't the fact that the wind turbines couldn't withstand the cold, it's that they weren't weatherized. Most of the wind turbines in the world are actually like in the North Sea. They're in Scandinavia, north of Scotland. I mean, it's cold.
That's a good point. I never thought.
It's cold up there.
Yeah.
So it's in a lot of the wind turbines we also have in North America are towards the upper Midwest of the United States. Texas is generally seen as a pretty warm state, and they don't need the kind of weatherization. They also have low regulations, and the state didn't at the time require any kind of weatherization. That will change. So, they all have vulnerabilities. I think the other piece is like thinking about the storage of it. I think the intermittency of renewable energy is a valid concern. You can't store renewable energy, and you need a consistent base load, and that's coal, and that's natural gas, and to some degree hydro. So, there are real competitive issues in keeping the lights on. For us to want to make sure we're keeping a base load. And until we can have a base load, renewable energy will not be the dominant power. It won't be. But that's what's so exciting about thinking about energy storage. Think about those wind turbines when it's really windy or there's a storm, and being able to store that energy for long periods of time. It would be terrific.
Great. So I got one final question, and then we'll wrap up.
Sure.
And actually, I'm not sure about well, I'll just ask the question. How do we compete with China in the solar industry when they produce most of the components required to make the panels? Do they produce most of the components? All right.
Once upon a time, unfortunately, John, they didn't. We did. And policies allowed China to take that over. And that was just bad policy and bad trade laws done a couple administrations ago. So we've got to bring manufacturing back here. We've got to bring the critical minerals that are required to create those solar panels. We've got to bring them back here as well to the U.S. and money. And there's a lot of concern from the environmental left about mining in the United States. I'll go back and say mining in the United States is a lot cleaner than it is in other places of the world. So it's a supply chain issue, it's an environmental issue, but we need to build things in the United States. And that was something we saw from President Trump, is we don't make anything anymore. We need to build those things here. And this is a really good example. China, if they're building or innovating, but they definitely are building a lot of the pieces that we need here in the United States, so critical pieces. The larger pieces, like a big blade of a wind turbine, it's going to be manufactured likely in the United States, just because it's so expensive to haul it from Australia or Germany. But some of those critical pieces are coming from China, and we need that all happening here. So Congress, both sides of the aisle, are looking at manufacturing incentives, bringing manufacturing here back to the United States. I think that's something we all can get behind.
It always comes back to China. Heather, this has been a very interesting and informative conversation. Thank you so much for joining us, and thank you for all the work that you're doing on this issue and with our members of Congress and lawmakers around the country. I think a lot of our members appreciate it, and we're looking forward to seeing all those other bills that you alluded to that are going to be coming out here in the next year or so.
Put your seatbelts on. It's going to be fun.
All right, great.
Thank you for having me.
And thank you everyone for joining us.